Yeah.
We play cards 3 nights, or I play 3 nights.
What do you play?
We play euchre on Wednesday night, sheep's head on Thursday night, and then pigs and jokers on Friday night.
Yeah,
You play for nickels on sheep's head? At the senior center, they play for nickels.
Calimera! Thank you. That's kind of what we did the very first time we heard that too, but Calimera is the way to greet people in Greece. It is basically a version of good morning. So let's try that again. Calimera!
Calamari.
Yes, we were often told it is not calamari, it is Calimera. So thank you for being here today to hear about our trip to Greece. As we experienced a lot of the places that Paul journeyed to on his second missionary trip. I'm glad to see that most of you have already found goodies this morning. We decided to bring some of the things that we had on a regular basis when we were there. Greek salad was very different than a Greek salad that you order here in the United States. There is no spinach or lettuce in Greek salad in Greece. It is just big, chunky vegetables with olive oil and a little bit of vinegar. And so lots of feta. Sometimes there were big blocks of feta on top of your salad when you got it, and you just had to break it up. We cut it up a little bit for you today. But between Greek salad and tzatziki, we had those at pretty much every meal. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They were always available. There were a lot of people that thought it was odd to be eating olives first thing in the morning, but when you're in Greece, you do as the Greeks. And then also one of the regular desserts that we had was baklava, which we actually went and purchased at Petra. If you have not been to Petra, I recommend trying it out. It is not Greek food necessarily, it's Mediterranean food. But actually, Heather introduced me to Petra.
And fun fact, baklava is traditionally made with 33 pastry layers, which represent the 33 years that Christ was alive. We learned that yesterday.
Layers of pastry
Yep.
and baklava to represent the 33 years of Christ's life. Petra is, if you know where the Habitat Restore is on Odana, just east of there, there is a little strip mall that you will miss if you are not looking for it. And Petra is in there. And
There's a light by.
what?
There's a light.
There is a light right there. Yeah. So we strongly encourage you to check it out. But you are eating their walnut baklava today. They have pistachio and cashew and all different kinds of baklava. But we decided to stick with one rather than making you choose which one you want. So here we are at the Madison Airport, ready to go. And some of you might recognize Flat Jesus from a few years ago. He traveled with us to Greece, although I forgot to take him in very many pictures. So while he was with us, you won't see him in many of the pictures. There was a couple that was with us on the trip that would sometimes remind me, hey, where's Flat Jesus? Oh, yeah. So we had a little bit of chaos at the beginning of our trip, but there's lots to cover. So Steven or I can share the beginning chaos with you at another time, between canceled flights and rebooked flights and lost luggage. It was interesting.
That was fun.
But it got much better.
Well, look how happy we are. That's at the airport.
That's before we lost our luggage.
Oh, that's true. That is true.
It is after the cancellation and rebooking. So, we left Madison on Thursday, April 9th. So the Thursday right after Easter. And landed in Athens, actually. And Athens, one of the most familiar sites in Athens is the Acropolis and the Parthenon, which I will get to in a minute. But what was interesting was that the Orthodox calendar works differently than ours. Orthodox Easter is a week later than our Easter. So when we landed in Athens on that Friday, it was Good Friday. And so it is, the country of Greece is 97% Greek Orthodox. And Easter is their biggest celebration of the year. And so people kept telling us, oh, isn't Athens just so empty right now? We're like, never been here before, we don't know if this is empty or not. But people leave the city to go to the islands or to the country to be with family or to have their holidays during the Easter holiday. Kids are off school for 2 weeks at Easter time, kind of like our Christmas. They get that at Christmas too, but it is celebrated in that they go away in Athens. Little side note, our taxi driver that took us from the airport to the hotel, his name was Hercules. So on the first day that we were, the first full day that we were there, by the time we got there and got to our hotel, it was evening, and so we didn't really do anything on Friday. Saturday, Friday night we met up with the rest of the group that was coming primarily from Ohio. And then on Saturday, our first stop was to go to the Acropolis and the Parthenon. And right below that is the Areopagus. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Yeah. Couple of people. Steven says yes. So in our study of Acts, we heard about the Areopagus in Acts 17. When Paul goes to Athens, he gathers with people at the Areopagus, and they have all of these altars to all of the gods that they worship in Greece. And there is one altar that is made for an unknown God. And there at the Areopagus, Paul says, hey, I know about this unknown God. Let me tell you about this God. Makes me teary when I think of it. Both, as Steven and I walked up to it, we both immediately had tears in our eyes to think about being in this place. So this is us standing on top of the Areopagus. The picture before was this is kind of this stone structure. It is where they would gather for meetings and to debate and all kinds of things. And so the altar that they had for the unknown God, this was new learning for me, was that there was an epidemic in Greece. And they had offered sacrifices to all of their gods, and nothing was working. So they thought, there must be a God out there that we don't know about yet. So we're going to create an altar to this unknown God and offer sacrifices to whatever God that might be. And the epidemic stopped. So there are occasionally altars to that unknown God in places, at least there were, throughout Greece because of that. And so Paul comes to tell them, hey, this unknown God that you have been worshiping, let me tell you about that God. I know who that is. I think one of the things that was most striking to me as we did that was to notice that this Areopagus, where Paul is talking, like, I know this all-powerful God, is right in the shadow of the Acropolis and the Parthenon. I don't think I realized that geography, that right over his shoulder, they may have been seeing the temple to the goddess Athena on top of the Acropolis as he is talking to them about this God that they don't yet know. So here we are, we're kind of going up to the Acropolis and the Parthenon, and I just wanted to point out that you can see this is the aerial view of the Areopagus. So as you're up on the Acropolis, you are seeing this space. That's a wider view. So it's right here, and then zoomed in there. it was really powerful to be in a place where all of these buildings have been standing for literally thousands of years. As I mentioned, the Parthenon is a temple to the goddess Athena. One of the things that is really interesting, I thought was really interesting, that there was the wisdom and foresight and planning way back then, is that the pillars of the Parthenon are not actually lined up straight. They are slightly curved so that they look straight in pictures and from a distance. I think often when we picture all of these buildings, we imagine them like we see them today in this white marble. But actually, in the times that they were used, they would have been painted all kinds of vibrant colors. Another new learning for me. And people wouldn't actually ever go into these temples. The temples were built for the gods or goddesses. So there would be a statue like this was built for the goddess Athena. And so there would have been a statue of Athena inside the Parthenon, but then people would have come and gathered around it to worship, they wouldn't actually go in. And so this huge building was made for the god alone. The other thing that was also interesting to me, when we think about Athens, we think about the Acropolis, or when we hear the word Acropolis, maybe we automatically think of Athens and this particular Acropolis with the Parthenon. But Acropolis is simply a word that means high place in the city. And so everywhere we went, you would see an Acropolis in each of these main cities. And they would often have temples on them, or they would be places where that was the safest place to be in the city, because you could see anyone that was coming to attack, and you could defend yourself best from that high place. And so when we, in a minute when we get to Corinth, there's a picture of they actually call it the Acrocorinth. So instead of the Acropolis, which is the general term, the Acrocorinth is the Acropolis of Corinth. So, fun story about the Parthenon is that after the war, the ruler wanted to put the young men to work. And so that is how the Parthenon came to be. They mined marble from a mountain that was 16 miles away and brought it back to the Acropolis to build on top of the Acropolis. And so first they had to build a road to the Acropolis. So it took 9 years for this to be completed. And as you can see, there are some scaffoldings up. It has taken over 50 years for them to be doing restoration and repairs. Jerry, did I see you with your hand up?
I was just going to say, it looks like they're doing some maintenance on it, because I see a crane and some scaffolding. And
Yep, so I beat you to it.
I have a question.
Yes.
Pastor,
Yeah,
how does the road look, or have they replaced the road with a new road?
I would think they have replaced that road with a new road. When we get to the very end of our trip, we will show you an ancient road through Philippi, so that you can.
I'll wait for that.
Okay. So also up on that Acropolis is the Erechtheum, which you may have seen pictures of with those female statues. Even though the Parthenon is for the goddess Athena, it has a more structural kind of masculine feel, and the Erechtheum has these female statues as pillars, kind of the more feminine side up there. That was built because, as the story goes, Poseidon and Athena were competing to rule over this capital city, and Poseidon stuck his trident in the ground and brought forth water, but it was salt water, and the people were unimpressed. Athena planted an olive tree, and the rest is history. So which is kind of to honor that battle between the two of them, they have planted an olive tree. The whole grounds of the Acropolis is covered in olive trees, but they have intentionally planted only male trees so that they cannot pollinate and have a mess of olives everywhere. So there are olive trees everywhere, but you will not find an olive among them. From there, we traveled to Corinth, and if you're keeping track, it's kind of hard to see it on a map, but Athens is here. Corinth is just over here. So it was one of our shorter trips. We spent a lot of time on buses and ferries and all kinds of other modes of transportation. But Corinth is just here, not far. And our travels kind of took us on Paul's journey in reverse. So actually, Paul started on this missionary journey where we ended, and so we're kind of moving backwards. So Athens was his last stop before he went back to Jerusalem, and we kind of started there and then are going back the other way. So we went to Corinth after the Parthenon and the Acropolis. Initially, Athens, as we said, was the goddess of wisdom. Athena was the goddess that kind of took care of Athens. In Corinth, the goddess that was their caretaker was Aphrodite. So you have the goddess of wisdom in Athens. You have the goddess of love in Corinth. Corinth was a major trade route. If you look at the map, there's just this little tiny piece of land in between the Aegean Sea and the Ionian Sea. And to save people 250 dangerous miles of going around, they would actually portage stuff across the land there. And so there were all kinds of tradespeople that were going through Corinth all the time. I will show you a picture in a minute about how they have made that much easier. But because of that being on that trade route, Corinth had a reputation for being a city where a lot of not so great things happened. It was known for having a lot of bad behavior. And so Paul comes to Corinth and actually ends up spending 18 months there. Because it was right on the water, he was able to use his tent-making skills to help repair sails. And so he stayed there for 18 months. And as they started to discover the city of Corinth, initially, all that you could see, if you were looking at this picture, is those pillars up at the top there, which are a temple to Apollo. That is all that could be seen here. And as they began to excavate, they found the whole agora, or marketplace, of the ancient city of Corinth. And so all of these structures that you see were all buried. And as they began to uncover them, they discovered that whole agora. And so in that picture there, you can see the Acropolis of Corinth with a building up on the top. And here is the agora, or the marketplace. And you can see all of the bottoms of all of the walls. That would have been all of the little booths for people to sell whatever they were selling in this marketplace. And so just as I was saying in my sermon today, you can look at this and you can see just a bunch of old rocks. Or you can see a story that is being told and kind of life coming to this place as you think about people gathering in this place to buy and sell goods, to meet up and have discussions and debates. Corinth is where Paul met with Priscilla and Aquila, who we hear become partners with him in his mission to share the gospel of Jesus. And like I said, we think that he stayed there for about 18 months. At one point in that time, there are elders of the synagogue who feel like Paul is not preaching in line with the Mosaic law. So they kind of bring him to court in a way. And in that time, Paul and Gallio, who would have been the person interviewing him or confronting him, would have stood up on this bema. They would have stood up there, and then everyone else would have stood on the ground below to listen to the discussion. Eventually, Gallio says, you know what, this doesn't really have anything to do with Roman law, I don't see anything wrong with what he's doing, and kind of throws out the whole case. But we hear about that in Acts 18. And so this is our whole motley crew there. We're actually up on top of the bema at that point. And because it was an important place in the life of Paul, it eventually became, they turned it into a church for a while. They built a building on top of it, which it's not like, we are on about a fourth of that total space, so it's not very big, but they had a church there, and so you can see some of the stones have a bunch of like cross carvings and stuff like that in them. But I was trying to keep in mind time, so I have tried to minimize the number of pictures, because I think we probably had about 1,000 of them to go through over the 10 days. The Corinth Canal was also completely breathtaking. Like I said, they at one point would portage all of those goods from the Ionian Sea to the Aegean Sea or vice versa. And they could save 250 dangerous miles of going around that part of Greece by doing that. But in 1893, they carved this Corinth Canal, which is 4.5 miles long and 250 feet deep. And now, you might not be able to tell from the proportions of this picture, but a cruise ship can fit through there now. And so all of that shipping that goes through there, they don't have to unload and carry across the land and vice versa. So that was really quite a sight to see. And you can't really tell, but for like, Steven, do you remember, he's washing dishes, do you remember how long the canal was closed for cleaning? You can't really tell, you can't really see it in this picture.
I thought they said like 6 months.
Was it that long?
I think so.
I don't think it was quite that long. But anyway, there's a way up there, just under the bridge, there is a machine that is going through and cleaning out that canal. And they close the canal to ships for some amount of time.
I think it was 3 months. 3 months.
3 months?
3 months.
Okay. They close that so that they can clean out the canal and keep it moving freely. So, as I mentioned, we arrived there on Good Friday, and so we experienced all of this on Holy Saturday. And in Greece, they celebrate Easter as it becomes Easter morning. And so they have worship that is in good Greek Orthodox tradition, several hours long. Most people attend worship for about 20 to 30 minutes. And they are there as it turns into Easter morning. So kind of the idea of a midnight mass. And so we traveled maybe 5 or 6 blocks from our hotel to the closest church, gathered in the courtyard outside with everyone else, discovered that apparently one of the things they do is light candles, and so found a woman who was selling candles on the corner, and we all got candles so that we could fully participate, and just got to participate in and witness the incredible procession of the priests of that church as they came out and chanted the Easter proclamation that Christ is risen. And then as they proclaim that, there are cannon fires that go off. And if you are asleep at midnight on Easter, you probably are not going to be for very long because they're very loud. But it signifies that the resurrection has come and the tomb is opened. And so as we were standing there, we saw some fireworks later from our hotel room, but we just really heard the big sonic booms while we were standing there, and that is a part of their tradition. So we did, as most Greeks do, we were there for about 20 to 30 minutes, and then found our way home. Everything was in Greek, so we didn't understand anything that they were saying, but still really powerful to be there and be a part of that celebration. Our guide for the beginning of our trip said that during these 50 days of Easter that we continue to be in, that in addition to greeting each other with Kalimara, they often, he said it in English, but I'm sure they say it to each other in Greek, they will greet one another by saying, Christ is risen, truly he is risen. So that is just every day on the street, not just as we're beginning worship during the season of Easter, but every day on the street, that is how they would greet people. And so he didn't do that with us, but he did say that that is part of their tradition. On Easter Sunday morning, we got up and went to Plaka, which is a historic neighborhood in Athens. You can still see the Acropolis and the Parthenon over the top. I mean, you can see it everywhere. And so kind of in the shadow of that again. One of the things that I think was surprising and kind of amazing to us is that everywhere we walked that morning, you could see lambs on spits over grills for lunch. And so I didn't give the really close-up picture in case that would bother some people.
Yeah, it's like the whole lamb, like it's the head, everything.
Whole lamb.
There's a spear right through it, and it's put on and it rolls and rolls until it's done, and they carve it right off there, and that's, I mean, it's pretty amazing. There was
It is
hundreds of them.
delicious, I just have to say.
I'll bet.
Yeah, big roast, yeah.
We did, as we were in this older part of Athens, we all had lunch together, and it was the place that we had lamb kebabs and gyros that were amazing. So the other amazing part of this is that while you're walking through this city, they have left space for all of these places that they have uncovered, all of this historic stones, parts of the city from ancient Athens. You're walking along, and then suddenly there's this big wide open space that is ruins that they have made space for within the city. And so incredible, like narrow roads with beautiful architecture, and then again, all of these old buildings. This is the Agora of Athens, the marketplace there. Our last night in Athens, we had a dinner and a folklore show, which became audience participation. I do have to say that Steven was the first one up on stage. Our leaders were trying very hard to get people up there, and nobody would get up. And finally, Steven jumped up and was up there. They eventually got me up for the very last dance before we left. So, a little audience participation as we got to experience some of their traditional music and dancing.
See the guy in the skirt. Yeah.
We then kind of left Paul's journey for a couple of days and got to go to Mykonos. Some of you may have heard early on that the cruise we were initially supposed to take that would take us to Ephesus and Patmos and Crete was canceled because the cruise ship we were supposed to be on was stuck in Dubai thanks to the war in Iran. So with just a little week and a half, 2 weeks before we were supposed to leave, we had no idea what was going to happen for those 4 days of our trip. But the travel agency managed to arrange for us to take ferries to go to both Mykonos and Santorini, and rather than just a quick 2 to 4 hour stop in those places, we spent a couple of days. We were overnight in Mykonos and 2 nights in Santorini, both beautiful places. Mykonos is known as the whitewashed jewel of these islands. Most of the buildings are white. I think Mykonos is the place where that was by law. But it also makes sense for them because it gets so hot there that painting everything white helps keep it as cool as possible. And so we were there for just a night, but we got to walk in these super narrow, beautiful streets downtown, and then made it out to the traditional windmills that are on the coast of Mykonos for sunset. Those were built in the 16th century, I think initially to mill flour, but now they've just been remodeled, and I think people stay in them, pay a lot of money to stay in them. If this, we just happened, Steven was watching The Bourne Identity last night, and I looked up just as the credits began to roll and saw this view. So the very last scene, if you've seen The Bourne Identity, the very last scene is them finding Matt Damon and his love interest finding each other on the island of Mykonos. So that was kind of funny, but we then went to Santorini. These are probably some of the images that you're used to seeing when people say you should go visit Greece. Santorini was highly affected by a volcano, and so most of that island is built up on the top of cliffs, and so this famous view of the whitewashed buildings with the blue roofs is in the city of Ia. It's spelled O-I-A, but it's pronounced Ia. And we got to spend just a couple of hours in that city. We were primarily in the capital city of Fira, and then we stayed in Fira Stefani, which means the crown of Fira, which means it was just a little bit up higher than Fira, which we discovered a lot when we got to do some more exploring. So here we are on the path that leads from Fira Stefani down into Fira, so you can see all the lakes of the city of Fira there. It's right along what's called the caldera. It's the pit that was created from the volcano, and so everything there is built on the side of this cliff. And the path that you take from Fira Stefani down into Fira is right along that edge. So you have these amazing views everywhere you go. And they have all along that cliff are hotels and restaurants and taverns, and there just happened to be one named PK. So the day that we had to fully explore and go down into Fira and come back, we went down into the city twice that day. I logged over 17,000 steps and the equivalent of 73 flights of stairs that day. So we did a lot of climbing and hiking.
Is that volcano dead now?
It is not dead. It is a live volcano. It gets a little active about every 50 years. And the last time it saw any action was in 1975. So go ahead and do that. But we did not see any action while we were there. We then returned to Athens overnight, and the next morning went on to Delphi, which that might ring some bells in your Greek history or Greek gods. It is where the oracle for the god Apollo spoke. People would come from all over to ask the oracle questions. And one of the things that I thought was amazing as they told that story is that the answers from that oracle would always be pretty vague. And so you had to interpret them. And if things did not turn out as you hoped, people blamed their own interpretation rather than the message from the gods. Because the gods could not be wrong. And so the other interesting thing about this is that it is celebrated as the ancient center of the world. And so I don't know that I got a great picture of it, but they have several different stone carvings of belly buttons because it is considered the belly button of the ancient world, the center of the world. And so just beautiful scenery. A lot of the places that we went, we would see these ancient theaters. And then again, a temple to the god Apollo. From there, we went on to the city of Kalambaka, which I will talk about in a minute. But as we entered into Kalambaka, we were privileged to go to the studio of Father Pefkis. He and his family have been creating icons for over 40 years, taking wood and tempera paint that they make with real egg yolk so that it dries really fast, using all natural colors and things, but creating these incredible images that then have gold leaf added to them. And so his son that is in that picture helps run the business, but he also has a son-in-law maybe and a daughter who also help paint. But the whole room, as you can kind of see over his easel there, is just covered with all of these amazing icons. And while we couldn't afford an original, we did buy a small replica, which is, we did get to watch Father Pefkis sign it on the back, sign and date it. But the one that we selected is Jesus calming the storm, and I'll pass this around so you can see it more closely. But the really interesting thing about this is that when I first looked at it, I was like, but there's two people with gold around their heads. That's supposed to be for Jesus. And when you look at it more closely, it is Jesus twice, because you have Jesus who is sleeping during the storm, and then you have Jesus who wakes up and calms the storm. And so just amazing, amazing work that he does, all in this traditional style. He actually was asked by the Vatican to create, what is it? What was it? Was it Mary, Joseph, and the infant Jesus?
Yeah, the Trinity.
Just really amazing and incredible to be able to go into his space and see him working. He was working on, his head is kind of in the way, but he was working on an image of the resurrection with Jesus standing on the cross.
Yeah.
Like the cross is on the ground and Jesus is standing victorious. So really just amazing I don't think he speaks very much English, so his son did most of the talking, but just incredible. Initially I was like, well, I don't know that that's really my kind of art, but once I got in there, I just couldn't resist bringing some of it home, just being able to see the incredible work that he was doing. From there, we went on to Meteora, which is a place where there are these incredible monasteries that began in the 11th century. If you look in those cliffs there, in those rock formations, you can see maybe from there to God. And eventually that grew into monasteries being created up on the tops of these cliffs. People would, in the early days, they have artist renderings. They would use rope and pulley systems to lift the people up to their caves where they might be, or up to the monasteries. We did a lot of, like I said, we spent a lot of time in buses, and a lot of that time was in a bus doing switchbacks on the side of mountains to get up to places like that. And so it just, breathtaking views everywhere, and just really amazing to think about the people who spent their lives kind of in that space. It was originally named Meteora because it felt like this holy space between earth and heaven. And so kind of lifted up above the earth, and so this holy space in between. There originally were 24 monasteries that were built up on these cliffs. There are 6 of them that still exist and have been and are still used by monks and nuns. And we got to go to the monastery of St. Steven, not the one in doing dishes that we heard about in worship today. And so this little bridge here is how we got into that monastery, because that crevice is what we needed to cross to get to the monastery. Just a beautiful place. The chapel inside is covered in icons, and I did purchase this book that you're welcome to take a peek at. But inside, this is looking up at the top of the sanctuary of the chapel of St. Stephen. So just completely covered in icons that tell the story of Jesus and his life. So I will leave this out to you if you want to take a look at that.
Pastor, that wall along the crevice you had to walk on, was that fairly high? So you
Yeah,
felt
so
safe?
like, I mean, if you can see this little fence right there, that fence would have been up to my waist at least. And so that's, I mean, that crevice, I would not have wanted to fall.
Yeah, you might just stumble and fall.
Yeah. So we were not able to take pictures inside the chapel, which is why that book is so important. But we did take pictures kind of around the grounds, which were just beautiful. And you can see forever from up there. But it is a place where there are nuns that are actively working and serving. And so it was also important for us to be respectful of that. It is the one place where women had to wear skirts to honor their traditions. Men had to wear long pants and women had to be in skirts. We did not go to the Holy Monastery of the Holy Trinity, but this is one of the monasteries that you can go to. There are 144 steps carved into the stone that you would need to take to get there. And because it would be nearly impossible for them to carry everything up those 144 steps, you might notice, if you can see from that far away, right there, there's a little cable car, which is how they get all of their supplies and mail and everything else. It is sent across in that cable car for those that live at that monastery. And if this looks at all familiar to you, you may be a James Bond fan.
Yes, I was going to say that. Yes. I was thinking the same thing, yes.
It was in the 1981 James Bond film, For Your Eyes Only.
Now, if somebody who was in that monastery became ill, how would a doctor get there? Did that cable car hold people, or would they have to take the steps?
I don't know that for sure. I think that they would have to take the stairs. I don't think the cable car works for people.
Okay.
that a cross on the side? The left side?
Oh, I see what you're talking about. I don't know that that is intentional. But if it's not intentional, that's pretty cool. Yeah, the cross right there in the side of the cliff. I would have to look that up. I don't think that that is intentional, but.
Maybe not man-made.
Right? Yeah. From there, we went to Berea, which is what it is called now. In the Bible, we hear it called Berea. It is the place that Paul went after he was run out of Thessaloniki. And we hear that the people of Berea were much more welcoming of Paul. And so it is a place that he actually returned on his third missionary journey. But they have this beautiful place with these mosaics that tell his story. Over there on the left is when Jesus appears to him and he ends up with the scales over his eyes and comes to believe in Jesus. And then you have him preaching and sharing the good news. So, while we were in that place, we stepped just off to the side, and Pastor Lowell and Pastor Corey presented a service of communion for us. So we were able to share in communion there. Like you can see that the whole thing is right here, and then that place where Steve and I are standing, the last picture is there, and that statue of Paul there. Always presented as an older, very thin, bald man. And then our last full day was in Philippi, and I think Steven and I would agree that this was probably the most powerful day of our whole trip. Again, you have the theater that we see in a lot of those places, and then passing through this ancient archway to the rest of the city of Philippi, which actually Philippi does not exist as a city in Greece anymore. It was an ancient city, and there are lots of cities around it. But and then again, you have this ancient agora. You see those walls of fish shops or places that people would have come to trade their goods. And then also, because this place was used for centuries, the remnants of a basilica that was probably built about in the year 300, rather than the year 50 when Paul would have been walking these streets. In Philippi, we hear that as Paul is walking through the city, that there is a young slave girl who is telling futures, and she keeps following Paul and Silas around. And so Paul, finally tired of it, orders the spirit of divination out of her, and her owners get very angry because their cash income has just disappeared. And so they have Paul and Silas thrown in prison. And so, as you walk through the city, just on the edge of, like if you just turned around from that last picture that I showed you, we have what they believe is the prison of St. Paul and Silas. Who that is also the story where as they're in prison, they're singing hymns through the night, and an earthquake disturbs the prison and the gates fly open, but they stay put because they don't want the guard to suffer for them escaping. And so when the guard wakes up and realizes what has happened, Paul and Silas say, don't, like the guard is ready to fall on his own sword, and they say, don't do that, we're all still here. And because of that, the guard and his whole family are baptized. And so it is just a small little cave. It is not like what we would think of as a jail. It's not even what you'll see in a couple of slides of what the iconographers create as the jail. But they believe that that is So then we get to the ancient road, Carol. This is the Via Ignatia. It was a highway that connected Istanbul and then passed through Greece. And it is through Greece. And it is the path that Paul would have walked from Philippi to Thessaloniki. And so we are there walking in the footsteps of Paul. But yeah, so that is what the road looks like today. It's not a road that you would want to drive on, but definitely a road you can walk on. And actually, I didn't get a good picture of it, but my colleague Lowell, the other pastor that was on the trip, pointed out that you can see ruts in some of the stones, and those are from the chariots. So you think about those ruts that were made, which is why trains are as wide as they are, because they use those same ruts when they started building things, or maybe not use the ruts, but like everything has been consistent because of that, from that time. And so just really to think about the fact that we might be walking in the exact same place, on the same road that Paul walked. They're still uncovering parts of this. So the next place that we go after we finish this time in Philippi is to the baptistry of Lydia. And our guide said we normally could have just walked maybe 10 minutes to get there, but they have found more of this road, and so they are excavating that. And so you can't cut through there right now. But to go back in a few years, you might be able to walk the Via Ignatia from Philippi out to the baptistry of Lydia. This is the Octagon at Philippi. It is a church that was dedicated to St. Paul, probably, again, somewhere between 200 and 300. It was built and built in that octagon form that we hear in a lot of different ways. Like our baptismal font is on an octagon. That octagon kind of shows up in a lot of different places. And this particular church was built that way. I just continue to be amazed by that floor is all mosaic. That is ancient from those times. And just the work and the attention to detail that went into all of that, that it has remained for over 2,000 years is just mind-blowing to me. And then she told us that this is where the altar was, so I felt like I needed to come have a picture taken at the altar. Like I said, just outside of Philippi, when we hear that story of Paul in Philippi, he, as we know, as we talked about in our Bible study, he usually went to the synagogue first. He would reach the people who were of the Jewish faith first, and then go out into the community to share the good news of Jesus. When he got to Philippi, they did not have a big enough community to have a synagogue, but they said, you can probably find the place of prayer out by the river. And when he gets out there, he finds Lydia, the dealer of purple cloth, and eventually baptizes her there. And so they have created this beautiful chapel, which has, again, the icons everywhere, the big baptismal font in the center, and the artwork everywhere was just mind-blowing. The entryway has this mosaic, which actually chronicles the mission trips of Paul. And so, my Greek isn't great, but this is Corinth here. Not sure what that middle city is, but then it's Berea and Thessaloniki and Philippi. And Neapolis is the one just below Philippi that we hear that that's where Paul enters Greece, is in Neapolis. And then goes up to Philippi. So he actually goes, well, we went this way on our trip, Paul went this way. But to see that all done in the floor in mosaic, like tiny mosaic pieces, was just amazing. And then, again, the ceiling and the walls are covered with these amazing icons. So we get, like here we have a picture of Paul meeting Lydia by the stream. And as I mentioned earlier, this image of Paul and Silas in prison, and then the doors being open, but them staying and the guard there on his knees, asking to be baptized. The story of Lydia is in Acts 16, 11 through 15, and she kind of says, look, there's a stream here, what, kind of like the Ethiopian eunuch, what is to prevent me from being baptized? So we believe that it's probably within 100 yards of this exact location is where Paul baptized Lydia. And so as we gathered there, Pastor Lowell, who was my colleague when I served in Wichita, invited me to join him and Pastor Corey in doing baptismal remembrance. And so we cupped our hands and grabbed water out of the stream and reminded people that they were marked with the cross of Christ and sealed by the Holy Spirit forever. I may have had a little trouble getting those words out as I was marking the cross on Steven's forehead. But just for reference, those of you who knew Pastor Rich and knew that he was very tall and slender, this is the colleague that I worked with in Wichita, and notice that he is standing down a step from me and still is looking down at me. So we were a little bit opposite there too. But just a super powerful moment there to remember our baptisms in that place where we hear about a biblical baptism. Back in Thessaloniki, we didn't see a lot of Paul sites specifically in Thessaloniki. We know in Scripture that he wasn't warmly welcomed there. People ran him out of town and went to Berea. But then we have the two books that were written to the Thessalonians. So churches did start there, and Paul did connect with those people. We went to the Church of St. Demetrios in Thessaloniki, just again, breathtaking chapel that is dedicated to St. Demetrios, who was a young man who was imprisoned for his belief in Jesus, and they think put to death actually in an old bathhouse that is underneath this church. And so for a lot of times there are these tunnels underneath the church, and it was used as storage at different times. They believe it is an old bathhouse, like I said. And after an earthquake, I think, in the 1960s, they discovered that the rumors that there were these hidden places under the church were true. And so they cleaned everything out, and you can go down there and see this little dedication to St. Demetrios down there in the place where they think that he was put to death for his faith in Jesus. The city of Thessaloniki, kind of like Athens, you have all this more modern buildings right around the ancient theater and these towers that are kind of in the middle of the city in ways that are unexpected. You have these wide open spaces of all of this throughout the city of these ruins. One of the things that you can maybe see a little bit better in this picture than in other pictures is that in a lot of those theaters, there was not a front row. So like there was a front row, but it wasn't at the ground level. And And our tour guide asked us if we knew why. Does anybody think you might know why? You don't get to answer, Steven. Because some of the entertainment that they were watching involved lions. And so that would protect the audience from the lions. So, and then our very last night, we got to watch one last sunset over the Aegean Sea from downtown Thessaloniki in the Aristoteles Square. So, the sun came down on our trip.
Nice.
It really was an amazing time. So many incredible things to see and experience. If any of you think that a trip like this might be something you would be interested in, let me know. There's always the possibility that we could do a trip of All Saints people to go or combine with other people in the area and do that. So if that sounds intriguing to you, let me know. It really was incredible to be there. The time we were there was perfect because the weather was in the 60s. It wasn't super crowded. Once you get into May, it is their busy season, and they have told us that you can barely walk in some places. It's so crowded. And so it was beautiful that we got to, the day we were at the Acropolis, we got there right after they opened the gates. And had a beautiful walk up, and then when we had to walk back down, it was so crowded that we could barely get out of there. And so, if that's in the off season, I can only imagine how crazy it gets when it is their main tourist season. But
Did it rain at all while you were there?
it rained one day, but the only rain came while we were on the bus driving, I think, from Kalambaka to Thessaloniki, so we never got wet. So it was sunny most of the time, or a little overcast some days, but in some ways that made for better views because we weren't dealing with the glare of the sun. So thank you for staying late. I did not realize, I got talking and did not realize it was almost noon. So thank you for taking time.
Thank you.
Did you take most of these pictures with a camera, or did you use your phone?
My phone.
Oh, because they're great pictures.
Yeah, you guys should also, Pastor Kristin, you want